Before I read this essay, I want to make a quick note. Bipolar disorder has kicked my ass. That diagnosis in 2004, from then until we get to April of 2012, really took a hatchet to some key parts of my career, and that's difficult. But I've been extraordinarily fortunate too. And every time I go to one of these DBSA meetings, or I go to a NAMI meeting, or I end up being over, like, for example, in this area, we have a place called Kodak, which is public services for people who have these conditions. I'm reminded how very fortunate I am. I've been able to practice for substantial periods of the time since I was diagnosed. I've been able to teach and write. I've been able to practice law. I've been able to, go to court, do trial, and all that stuff. So I'm very thankful, and I need to remember that. The problem that I think I get, and others who are basically paid to think, is that we end up in a situation like this woman I met when I was working for this great nonprofit here in Tucson, Arizona, Primavera Foundation. This woman I met, she's sleeping rough. I mean, she's on the streets, and she is highly accomplished. I mean, I think she had a couple of graduate degrees, and she had been able to do much. And she said to me, "Nothing I've ever accomplished matters anymore." And that is something that I feel, and it's something that others I know in that position also feel. So it's challenging, but at the same time, I don't want to forget how very fortunate I am compared to some folks. Now, I have no tech stuff here. I have no tripod. Please bear with me. The Natchez Trace was called the Devil's Backbone long before spring of 2012, when it almost became the final stop in my bipolar legal career. March 2012, somewhere near Franklin, Tennessee. The patients in the psychiatric unit mumbled their revulsion for the distinguished lawyer whose bloated colostomy bag had slipped open, sending its vile contents onto the floor and furnishings of the break room where the patients had gathered to watch television. I loathed the man for another reason. Not too long before that, the gentleman confided in me that the reason he had that bag was because he'd blown out his insides with buckshot. He had tried to kill himself, he told me, because bipolar disorder had destroyed his legal career. So my disgust wasn't at the wretched odor that was then hanging in the break room. It was at this man. His simple existence mocked my hope that my own bipolar disorder would stop terrorizing me and let me get back to doing what society calls worthwhile work. 2 days earlier, I'd almost killed myself. Williamson County, Tennessee Sheriff's deputies came to visit me at Natchez Trace Bridge, an award-winning structure that as of 2019 has proven itself reliable and effective for all but one of the 30 men and women who've chosen this extraordinarily beautiful part of Middle Tennessee to end their lives. I'd spent too long, it seems, discussing the merits of crashing onto State Route 96 in the 7th wealthiest county in the entire country. And now I stood, again, in pale blue scrubs behind the locked doors of a psych facility. I looked down at the fecal trail that followed my fellow lawyer down the hall. I thought of my own path. It reeked too. It consisted of less than political statements and acts, simmered in the cauldron of pharmaceutical side effects that I was told I had to endure if I wanted to stay alive. It wasn't always this way. I had started my legal career as a prosecutor who didn't have any idea how many people are broken. But my caseload included more than criminal cases. I had the mental health docket. So 24/7, if there was somebody, a man or woman, who was believed to be a danger to self or others, then whether we're in the courtroom or at the ER there at the hospital or at the jail or wherever it is, I'm talking to the judge based on the information I get from the experts, and I'm asking that this person, a person like this lawyer I just met, be locked up. I'm asking that somebody like me, like I, get locked up. In the years that followed, my legal career continued to intersect the blurry line that is mental illness. Reviewing psychiatric records, questioning expert witnesses who tried to explain the depths of some folks' darkness, and getting courts to see my clients as more than just numbers on file folders were just things that any lawyer should do. that I was particularly focused and passionate about mental health issues didn't occur to me. I slept little in those days. Back then, I could rely again and again on having enough energy to work late at my office or to meet with clients at the Oklahoma County Jail well past midnight, even though I had to be in court first thing in the morning. Despite a caseload of time-intensive state and federal cases, I volunteered time and energy to serve as an officer of the Federal Bar Association chapter there and in the American Inns of Court. I judged law school moot court competitions and taught a couple of CLEs. I took the time to write articles and essays that proposed strengthening a federal criminal statute and which encouraged my colleagues to think outside the box on matters concerning the death penalty and concerning how we practice law. "How do you keep up that pace?" asked the lawyer who, it turns out, would soon be handling my divorce. "You'll burn out," he said. John was right. On a blistering July afternoon, my mind began to race itself toward a crash with both brake and gas in my head slammed to the floor. The intensity was strangely familiar, but this time the sensation was unbearable. I was in a passenger seat. My wife was driving. Our daughter was in the back. We were in motion. Not real fast, but I jumped out and I vanished for days. And during those days, on the streets and in a shopping mall, because it's damned hot in Oklahoma in the summer, my mind searched for something that was familiar. I rummaged through like I was looking like a bargain hunter digs through the leftovers at a garage sale. I wanted to find something that was familiar. But no matter what I turned over in my mind, I couldn't find my clients' names. I couldn't find what their cases were about. And I couldn't find a single memory that told me how I could file even the simplest of legal documents for them. I was already scheduled as president of my Federal Bar Association chapter to welcome attorneys who had recently been admitted to practice in federal court there in the Western District of Oklahoma. It was no big deal, but I was terrified, and it turned out for good reason. As I stepped to the podium and began to speak, I found that everything I knew so well about our federal courts was now balled up in my mind like a spider's web. And I heard the same confusion come from my voice and the words that I said, and after that, I didn't want anyone to see me. In the months that followed, I passed off my cases to other lawyers, closed my practice, left my wife and child, had an affair that blew apart two perfectly fine families, wrote a confessional, 300-page novel in 3 weeks, and returned to Nashville where I'd finished high school and tried to start a new life. I stopped listening to news and to any commentary about the world around me. Old friends Sammy Hagar and Angus Young started coming around a lot more often. I banged hard on my old upright piano, hoping to drown out the screaming tension that had taken over my life. The doctors diagnosed me with bipolar disorder, also known as manic depression. According to K. Redfield Jameson, PhD, co-author of the definitive medical text on manic depressive illness, bipolar is a condition that is characterized by fierce energy, high mood, quick intelligence, increased risk-taking, and decreased need for sleep. It also comes with an amped-up risk of suicide. I certainly knew of bipolar disorder and had studied the DSM diagnostic criteria. It was the unbridled manic depressive symptomology that made a lot of those commitment hearings necessary when I was an assistant DA. I considered the diagnosis a death sentence. John had been right. It would have been impossible, at least for me, to maintain the same kind of pace indefinitely. But I was handling it all pretty well, and I hadn't sacrificed any of the top-shelf legal work that I did for my clients. Something specific must have triggered otherwise dormant symptoms. At least it's always seemed that way to me. At the time, in summer of 2004, I was trenched deep in reviewing seemingly never-ending evidence that federal prosecutors had turned over in a multi-state child sex trafficking case. I was having a hard time shaking a visual image that my mind had created as I read through FD 302s and other investigation documents. A 10-year-old kid kidnapped, taken from her state, so she could be sold out for sex. What was left of that little kid's body was found in a dumpster behind a grocery store across town. She had told the bottom bitch who ordered her to go make the over-the-road trucker happy. She told her no. And so What was left of her was behind that grocery store. My daughter had been 10 years old, not too much long before that. But whatever cause or causes, I still considered my new bipolar diagnosis to be a death sentence for my career and for my life. But men and women in white coats with their names embroidered on them told me that if I took my medication, saw a therapist, and steered clear of drugs and alcohol, that my condition would no longer interfere with my life and it wouldn't interfere with my ability to practice law. This should be easy enough, I thought. Illegal drugs have never been a problem for me, and I hadn't abused alcohol since I was in college. I did everything the doctors told me to do, and I did those things exactly as they had instructed. Between late summer of 2004 and the April of 2012, 7 years ago, my bipolar disorder cost me 2 jobs with other law firms and forced me to close a private practice. Bipolar severed relationships with those I cared about most, alienated friends and family, and put me in psych facilities 7 times. My manic depression made me want to die more times than I can count. Now, even though I've not once thought of killing myself for almost 6 years, if not longer, I remain wary. Bipolar disorder has had a way of jumping up and biting me in the ass. So I may again clutch a .38 revolver as I try to figure out how to make the smallest mess for folks to clean up. I may again stand on a sidewalk, struggling to make an educated guess as to the optimal moment when I should step off the sidewalk and into the path of a bus traveling at 40 miles an hour. If so, I hope I'll do a better job remembering the analysis that I'm about to read than I did that day in late March or early April of 2012 when I drew near to a jumping bridge on the Devil's Backbone. I can either kill myself, I wrote, which would take me away from those who love me, but it would stop the pain, or I can choose to live. If I'm to live, I have to remember 5 important truths. First, I'm not alone with this illness, and the lawyer who filled himself with buckshot is not alone either. And this number needs some updating. But according to the U.S. Surgeon General, we're among more than 15 million persons who, during the course of a given year, suffer from severe depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and obsessive-compulsive disorder. As my medical expert explained in one trial many years ago to jurors, people with bipolar disorder can rise to the very top of their profession. And the physician explained, we're talking about people with household names. A second fact I need to remember is that there are organizations out there to help me and to help my loved ones. National Alliance on Mental Illness, goes by NAMI, and the Depression and Bipolar Support Alliance, DBSA, are just 2 of the groups. Those are national groups, dedicated to helping individuals and their families cope with what can be a crippling condition. Crisis hotlines exist in many cities. For those who think they can't go on, there's the National Suicide Hotline, which is on the bridge in the feature image that I have at the top of this article and which I wrote as well. That there have been profound pharmaceutical advances is a third truth that I should keep in mind if I'm to avoid becoming just another statistic. I need to remember that some of my medications have helped me live and work as well as anyone else. It's just that sometimes the medications need changing, and I've grown weary at those times when the doctors work hard to find one or more that works. But the science of treating brain disorders has allowed medications to target specific parts of the brain with increased focus and increased efficacy. The likelihood that medications will again, as they have for these past 7 years, help me function is greater if I just let the doctors continue their work. The fourth truth I should remember about bipolar disorder is that it's forced me to stop and ask if my career is consistent with what I'm most passionate about in this life. Years before many ask the question, I have the opportunity to ask, okay, what am I here for? And, if I think it necessary, to change direction while there's still time. Now, I maintain a perfectly good law license in Tennessee. And before that, I had a perfectly good Oklahoma law license. There's never been reason to investigate me for professional misconduct, and even though bipolar disorder can be a very fast track to a criminal record, I don't have a criminal record. Even so, bipolar disorder has given me a fifth issue to consider. Manic depressive illness has forced me to look deep inside and find my worth in who I am. and not in what I do. It's not easy. Ours is a society that tells people they count if they work in professions that others think matter. That is, the more others pay for someone, the greater that person's own self-worth. But I have a worth separate and apart from what others say or pay. I have worth because the divine says so, because God says so, and I have worth because I'm part of the human family. Ralph Waldo Emerson said, "The greatest difficulty is that men do not think enough of themselves, do not consider what it is that they are sacrificing when they follow the herd or when they cater to the establishment." Bipolar disorder has forced me to see the truth in Emerson's statement. It's forced me to tell the establishment that it won't define my self-worth anymore. Strange as it sounds, bipolar disorder has given me a reason to live. Thank you. Take care.